Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Executive Insider. My name's JT O'Donnell, the founder and CEO of Work It Daily. And today I'm going to be talking to operations and customer success executive Daryl Hancock. We're going to be talking about how companies identify high performing talent. And this is based on an article that he wrote for the Work It Daily site that's getting a lot of traction, a lot of views. So we thought we'd bring him on the show and ask him some questions around this. So with no further ado, let me get Daryl up on the screen here so that you can meet him. Hey, Daryl.
Good afternoon, JT. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming on the show. So
Thank you for the
listen,
opportunity. I appreciate it.
I want to hear, this background in both operations and customer success as an executive. Give us the 60-second overview of your career and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I've been in the IT industry for a little over 20 years, and throughout that time, I've sort of developed a number of disciplines and processes that have helped me be successful in such a way that I've grown from individual contributor to team lead, management, and then at a director level in my most recent job. I'm working as a chief operating officer for a small software as a service firm. And in that role, I have a number of different elements, not the least of which is ramping up our team.
That's fantastic. That's great. And so over the years, you've had a lot of experience in hiring. And what really struck me about the article that you wrote, and I want to bring this up so everybody can take a look at it, was the fact that, this was about building a high performance culture. So you've had real experience around taking a team that's maybe disjointed or maybe no team whatsoever and focusing on making them extremely productive, being able to do, more with less. And so for those of you, we're going to chat you the link and you'll be able to see the whole article. I encourage you to go read it. But I really want to get into 6 questions that I thought were really important to kind of hit Daryl with in terms of getting down to how to really accomplish this, right? And what you've done to do that. So are you ready? You up for the challenge, Daryl?
Bring it on. Let's go.
Awesome. All right. So my first question to you is, what's a good place to start? What's step 1 for an organization when they want to improve the probability that they're going to get the right candidates in the interviewing? I think I hear this all the time. The companies are saying, we're just not hitting it. We're going through the interviews, we're interviewing a lot of people, and then we're not getting the right players on the bench, on the back end. Now we've spent all this time and this money, and we're not getting the right people. So, where do they start in the organization? How do they figure that out so that the success odds get higher?
I think the one thing that I've consistently seen as a miss for companies as they go down this dimension is not having a super clear idea of what success looks like. So you have to work with your HR partners. You have to craft a job description. Before you get into any of those sorts of things, though, you have to sort of think about what is it we're trying to accomplish with this hire. Are we trying to grow sales? Are we trying to improve a process? And what are the dimensions of someone that we think has been successful in that role, either in our organization or perhaps in other organizations? What are some of the key things? Are there history? Are there experiences? Are there a trajectory of their career? And once you have a clear understanding of what success looks like, then you have to be willing to stay on the track of making sure that you're driving to that goal. And frankly, sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from an okay candidate, because once you go down that path where you're now making concessions on the candidate, you've sort of damaged the opportunity to have the right person who exhibits the right behaviors, doing the right tactical things to get you to whatever it is you're trying to hire that person for in the first place. So I see too many times organizations simply put a generic ad out on whatever job board they're using. They don't have a clean understanding of kind of what success looks like. They haven't thought about the process of how they're going to interact with that candidate once they come into the system. And so then they get a group of candidates and they sort of decide, well, these 2 are the closest, and so we'll talk to them, or some subset. And now you're beginning to settle. And once you've gone down that path, you're diminishing what are going to be your returns. And we all know all the statistics about how expensive it is to hire the wrong person, and opportunity cost and damage to the culture inside of the organization. And so that investment on the front end of being super clear about what success looks like improves our probabilities of getting there and helps us minimize those costs and those mistakes and those EQ errors that we have to deal with as an organization for hiring, bringing in the wrong person.
I love that. And you know what I heard from you in that explanation, and you do say it all the time, because they didn't do a thorough job of planning out what they were looking for, they weren't asking the right questions. And so now you said they're just kind of picking the best. It's almost like, I hate to say this, but from a used car lot concept, right? You're not starting with the A's because it's not what you got, but now you're trying to make do. So that leads me into my next question for you, because you talk about the dimension of accomplishment. And so when a company, you said, look, they've got to get more dialed into what they're asking for, what they're looking for in a candidate. How does this translate when you're looking at the past accomplishments of a potential candidate? What do you mean by the dimension of accomplishment?
So I think for professionals who have a history of being successful, they've sort of learned in the margin, there are things that you do to be, that extra 10%, if you will, above good enough, right? So sometimes it's a question of, putting in some extra hours. Sometimes it's a question of using your time to go out and be passionate about the industry or the process that you're involved in, and learning more about, other successful best practices. But someone who has a history of being successful, someone who has a history of accomplishment, already knows the work, the effort, the extra things that have to go into being that person. And if you have a history of accomplishment, the probability of you being successful going forward is a lot higher. So it's just, again, the little kind of things in the margin that folks do to sort of set themselves apart, whether it's extra time, whether it's extra passion, whether it's asking that really good question, really understanding whatever they're involved in the organization, and having a passion, a commitment, a willingness to spend a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra effort to be above kind of a standard producer, someone who's really that next level of top performer in their organization.
Isn't that interesting? Because I agree with you. When you know when somebody really knows their stuff because of the depth in which they're able to explain the accomplishment, you can just tell they've actually done it, as opposed to using kind of overarching surface generalities. There are these little nuances or specifics they give that just kind of set off, and you go, oh, they know it because I've been there too, right? So it's very relatable. And that leads into our third question for you about this, because determining the activities that are right for the role, and I'm just going to jump off here for a second. I've gone into situations where I've asked an executive like yourself as a recruiter, what are you looking for in a candidate? And they essentially, whoever the last person was in the role, they essentially have them list out everything they do in the job right before they departed. And so we get this ridiculously long list of things that they're looking for. And we joke, we call it the bilingual brain surgeon at $10 an hour, because the hiring manager turns around and goes, I want that. I want the replacement to Bill. Well, Bill didn't come to the role with all of those experiences. Right. Bill crafted that and took on more things. And suddenly this was Bill's job before he left. And I think that a lot of executives and managers struggle to determine the activities that this role is going to have and which ones are most critical, because the truth is you're not going to get Bill. Right. So how do you go through that process of figuring out the core essential activities that are going to be needed for this role when you can't have everything, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I think when we, initially we talked about this idea of having a clear understanding of what success looks like, and that's going to help influence this a lot, right? There will be not just the attributes, but the activities. And when I think about this dimension, I look at it from the context of, we're all moving pretty fast in business these days. And so the opportunity to bring somebody in, or the option to bring somebody in who has no actionable activities, no things that they've been doing that align them to what we're trying to accomplish, it's a very big ramp up, right? So first of all, we put that person at a disadvantage. They're not likely to be successful unless they're just crazy, exceptionally willing to spend time and energy to get there. But so I look at the job description and the things that we're hiring for, and we can surmise without having in my world, we'd call that the list that you're talking about, JT, we'd call that the purple unicorn, right? So unicorn's tough enough, and yet a purple one, come on. Find me the purple unicorn that wants to work for $20 an hour. So we're not going to find that person. So what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 things, activities that this person is going to do on a regular basis that are tantamount to them being successful in this role? And now once we figured out what that is, we're now going to look for candidates who have done similar, not necessarily the same things, but certainly similar things that put them in a position to bring skill set to the table that sets them up for a high probability for success. And here's my kind of joking conversation here is this concept that, look, if somebody was in landscaping and they now decided that they want to become a surgeon, while both of those things are cutting, right? You're cutting grass and your surgeon is cutting. The one doesn't necessarily prepare you for the other. It's a different discipline. So I think the moral of that story is having, again, back to this idea of crystal clear understanding of it isn't just that they're cutting, but that they're precision cutting on living items. And, there's a focus on the activities that are specific to what needs to be successful, not some generalities like, oh, they're good with people and they've been successful at, doing something very easy to align with. There are very specific activities that lead to people being successful in their roles. Let's be able to identify them and then be able to look for candidates who have some history in that space and doing the similar kinds of activities.
I love it. And I think you gave such clarification there around activities, because I have seen a lot of managers hire based on personality, which we know for a fact becomes a huge factor, right? So they have personality, but they don't consider whether or not the person can do the activities. They're saying all the right things like we've talked about earlier at the higher level, but you're saying drill down, really take a look at how they execute and make sure that they can talk about that execution of those activities in a way that validates, which I think is brilliant. I love it. Right. But, talking about that personality factor, you do hit on, and I think it's wise, you talk about in the article, gauging a candidate's attitude. So let's talk about that too, because even if they have the right activities and you're hearing the right things, attitude is going to play a huge factor on whether or not they succeed, right?
So when I think about attitude, I was trying to do an alliteration with the letter A, right? And I couldn't think of a better word than attitude for this, but it's really passion, right? Does this person have a passion to be, committed to whatever job they're signing up for? And so how do you articulate that? In our world, and I'm in IT, right? One of the things that I think about is I'll ask about, what blogs do you read? Who do you follow on LinkedIn? What book is on your nightstand? What's the most recent book that you read that really, helped groom your career? Now, I'm not saying that you can't read the latest James Patterson novel. That's certainly fine, but there's also, in our industry, you're constantly sharpening the saw. Change is constant. There's some new technology. There's some change in technology. You have to be on the edge of whatever's out there. And so I ask the questions about blogs, books, folks that you follow on LinkedIn, influencers. And that can kind of tell you, that helps sort of frame up this idea of passion around the craft. So because I have an IT focus, it's easy for me to articulate those examples. But folks can think about other industries that are on the call, can think about their industry. And there are things that you would be able to look at and tell, is this person really passionate? Are they just showing up Monday through Friday, collecting a check, putting forth the minimum effort, probably, ruffling feathers, messing with your culture? If you want a culture of higher performing people, you need to continue to have people who exhibit those behaviors. And one of those things is, what do you do during off hours, if you will, to sharpen your saw and just sort of keep abreast of whatever your industry is? And, I think also I spent some time in the healthcare and the financial services industry. Both of those industries are constantly under regulatory changes. And so half of the battle in those industries is learning about the technology that supports those industries. And the other half is paying attention to the latest piece of documentation that comes out of Washington that influences how you interact with your customers. And so if you're going to be in those spaces, there's another dimension of, how you exhibit your attitude by, are you getting news feeds about certain customers, certain companies in those industries to keep you up to date on what's going on? And even if it's a competitor, right? If you're out in the marketplace talking to your customers, you need to know what your competitors are talking about. And so how do I exhibit that? I exhibit it through passion. I exhibit that through the behaviors that I do to make sure that I'm always sharpening my saw. I'm a big Franklin Covey fan, if you can't tell. And what are the things that I'm doing in the margin to be a little bit better than the next guy? I just need to be a little bit better than my competition so I can demonstrate to my customer this sense of me being a trusted business advisor, not just a vendor, right? Nobody wants to be a vendor.
No, it's so true. If you're interviewing a candidate and you're hearing that passion and that attitude, and I love the sharpening the saw concept. For me, I always call it nerding out on the subject. If they're fine and love to talk about it and nerd out on the subject, you've got somebody who's got some intrinsic motivation
Right.
to do that role, right? Which is exactly what we're looking for. I love it.
Well, and I think, JT, another point that you made, this idea of intrinsic, right? The other thing about passion is you can't teach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And either the person has it and they're engaged, but it's not something you can teach.
No, so true. So true. So let's talk about this term assimilate. Why is assimilate an important element in this process, in your opinion?
So again, trying to alliterate with the letter A. What I was really thinking about here is, look, your business is running today and you have some level of success, and hopefully you're adding someone to take you to that next level. And so if we brought in a candidate who simply didn't fit with the organization, didn't have the right emotional, the EQ for our organization, was breaking glass and causing disruption, they're actually going to be more trouble than it would have been worth to bring them in the first place. So when I talk about assimilation, it's really about the idea of do they exhibit behaviors? Do they seem like someone that would fit well with the existing team? I have kind of a funny story to tell. A number of years ago, I had my own business. It was a frozen dessert shop that's local to this area. It was a franchise. And I was in the process of doing some interviewing, and I met with this person that wanted to come to work at my shop, and she seemed great. She had said all the right things, had all the right answers in the interview process. And I always involve the peers. When I'm going to bring someone into an organization, I always involve that person's peers to get kind of their feedback, right? And so after the candidate left, I brought the team in and I said, I'm thinking about hiring this person. And they all said, if you hire her, we are walking out. I'm like, what? Well, it turns out that there was some drama, and without going too far down the path, the point of that story is just this idea of that person would not have assimilated well to the culture. They would have created more problems than they would have brought benefits to the organization. And so, smartly, I did not make that hiring decision.
That's fantastic. And how passionate were they about it for them to be that upfront with you, right?
There were 3 of them. Like, I got ganged up on.
That's incredible.
Don't hire her. She's terrible.
You definitely dodged a bullet in that one. Definitely. All right. I've got one more question for you before we take it to the general audience. And that is, what do we see some companies doing wrong, in your opinion, in the interviewing and hiring that's the easiest to fix? So if you're going to give people some quick tips right now, they could walk away and apply in their next job interview tomorrow, what would you suggest?
Wow. I think I've seen this happen a lot, right? If we're not clear at the beginning of what we're looking for, we kind of go down this abstract path and we take the best available candidate and then we settle. So JT, the answer to your question is you have to be willing to stay the course until the candidate shows up that literally knocks your socks off, right? And so if you think about the other things that we've talked about before, if you bring someone in that doesn't assimilate to the organization and breaks your culture, that's not going to be a positive thing, and it's something that you're going to spend a lot of time fixing in the future, right? So again, the short answer to that question is very clearly wait. You have to be willing to hold out for the right candidate and not settle. Now, I don't mean that you have to wait for somebody who's exactly the perfect candidate. You mentioned before, and we were talking some other dimensions. You can't exactly replace the person that was here before. So you as an organization have to figure out what's the percentage, what are the gotta haves, what are the nice to haves. But too many times organizations will have, they do their HR effort, they get a series of candidates, they whittle them down to 2 or 3 top candidates, and they've looked at them and they've said things like, well, they're all pretty good, but this person was the best of the lot. If you hear yourself saying those things, you need to stop. You need to look at those candidates again and determine, did you miss something, or are they really just not that good? Are they just okay? And if you really find out that they're just okay, you have to go back and recruit. You have to go and find someone who's going to really knock your socks off. If you start settling, you'll end up having an expensive, challenging situation that you'll have to fix, and it will not have been worth the effort, right? So stay the course. Know what success looks like. Wait until you find the candidate that knocks your socks off, and then be ready to pull the trigger and watch your team grow.
Yeah, I love that. And it can be hard, right? When we see the work
Yes.
piling up and we're short staffed, it can be easy to think, I just want to get somebody in here, but we've all done that and then it hasn't worked out. And we still do it, right?
So,
years
one of the other
years
things I
later,
think
we still
about,
do it.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, JT. One of the other things that I think about in that context is successful organizations are always in hiring mode. And what do I mean by that? Most every one of us that's in an executive leadership position belongs to some chamber of commerce, advisory council, something, right? And so in the back of your mind, as you're kind of working those groups, you should always kind of have an ear out for someone who, I don't have a need for that skill set today, but that person looks really interesting to me. And a year from now, when we expand into this other market, that person may be a really good addition. So as an executive, one of the ways you stay out of that problem of only having candidates to settle for is that you're always looking for somebody that kind of backfills and is in a position to be available when the right opportunity opens up in your organization. Does that always mean that they're going to be interested in making a change? Maybe not, but you've improved your probabilities for success by always having that sort of in the background as you're making your way through your business community, looking for potential candidates who you might add to your organization given the right circumstance in the future.
I totally agree with you. I've talked to so many executives over the years who've said they're just always in recruit mode. They're
Right.
always in recruit mode, which is such a great way to be. All right. I love it. But I want to turn it over to the audience because they've got some questions for you too. Are you ready for it? Are you in the hot
Wow.
seat now? You ready? Okay. So first of all, shout out Andrea saying, great session, Daryl. When you ask about books, blogs, podcasts the candidate is enjoying, do you consider self-development of the soft skills as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't know that I can put a percentage or a criteria. It probably has to do with the job, right? So the more technical the job is, then that those incremental learning opportunities probably lean themselves a little bit more towards a technical realm, and the more soft skilled focused the job is, then that probably tends to move the needle in that direction a little bit more. But I mean, absolutely, I personally am always reading some. I just finished reading The Energy Bus. If you guys haven't read that, it's an awesome, fast read, and it's like I was having a tough day. I managed to get through The Energy Bus over the weekend, and by Monday I was back. I was rocking. I was ready to go. So, to your point, there's a technical element as well as this idea of sharpening that emotional, the EQ side. So IQ and EQ, sharpening them both. The relationship of how much in each area probably depends on the job, and maybe to some extent the personality, and potentially also their career journey, right? So, but yes, absolutely.
I love it. Most definitely. And I love The Energy Bus too, by the way. It's a great book.
Yeah.
All right. We've got a question from Dan. Dan says, what kinds of things can companies do through onboarding and integration into the organization to maximize the odds of success?
Wow. So after the idea of being clear and focused and not making exceptions on getting the right candidate into the system, then the second most important element is onboarding. And frankly, very few organizations get this one right. So I think about organizations that are kind of going down this path of onboarding. So we're all in this place where we're running 900 miles an hour, and the speed of business is increasing every day. And how do we have time to do that? I think the organization has to simply commit to carving out time from some of its key internal resources that they must spend time onboarding a resource. And one of the most successful things I think of when I've seen companies do this successfully is this idea of mentoring. And it seems so simple, and yet very few organizations sort of execute on it. So step one, I think, for onboarding is we've documented kind of what we need to accomplish over a period of time, and we've set up some key milestones at key intervals just so we're getting feedback that we're making progress, and then assigning that new person a mentor. Now, the mentor doesn't have to be someone in leadership. It could be a peer. It could be someone on another team who has a vast amount of knowledge about the organization, about things that need to be conducted to be successful. But trying to, this is probably a session all by itself, but the short version is map out success, create milestones along the way, and then make sure that they've got at least one formal mentor And I know other organizations that actually do informal mentors where, they go to lunch. So the distinction there that I would draw is a formal mentor has a scheduled time with the new hire, once a week, once every other week, an hour, whatever. And an informal mentor is someone who they run into a problem and they just the new hire kind of walks over and says, listen, you mind if I ask you this question? So they're still part of that process. But those are the two elements, right? Again, mapping out a clear path, creating some milestones, and then putting mentors in place to get someone showing them the right way. And the other part of that process, frankly, organizations have to be just ridiculously paying attention to feedback from recent graduates of the onboarding program to what they liked, what they didn't like, what they would do differently. That thing is the definition of iterative, right? You are constantly going to need to be evolving that. So I rambled there a bit, but did I answer?
No. Well, I'm a big fan of it. At Work It Daily, we ended up building a self-onboarding program for our clients because so many of them are getting to companies where there aren't onboarding tactics, right? And so we say, okay, you're going to have to onboard yourself. That's how you're going to have to figure it out. So very critical part of the process. So important. So we've got another question from Todd. This is great. It's a two-parter. It says, Daryl, you say it's a great thing to have candidate bench. And I agree, execs are always in recruit mode. How formal are companies around that process? And the reason Todd asked that, and he says, I'm so frustrated when I see HR collecting resumes, doing interviews, but doing nothing with the database on those people that have great potential, but you only had one opening at that time. So I agree. There's this, what have you seen that's really working out there when it comes to the fact that if you're always recruiting and sometimes you're meeting people who just, they're great, but they're not the one for this role. What do you do there?
So this gets back to, relationship management, basic stuff, right? So if you've identified someone that you think would be a good addition to your team at some point in the future, but you don't have an opportunity for them, if you're really sure that that's somebody who's going to make a difference to the organization, then you want to do basic, if you met them at a, like a tech advisory council or something like that, just continue to engage with them. Check in with them, on LinkedIn or however else you're connected with them, and just continue to develop the relationship. It is absolutely a timing conversation, and you may come to a point where you're ready to bring them on, but they may be loving their current job. So there's a big amount of timing that sort of influences our success here. But I just know from personal experience that having that pipeline in place, managing that relationship, working with folks, having conversations. We have someone who I recently, well, not recently, but maybe 4 months ago joined our team. She's our customer success associate. She interviewed for 3 different jobs in the company. They were completely disconnected, right? But we knew she was a really solid candidate and she was interested in joining the firm. And so until we found the right combination of the right job that mapped to her skill sets, and we had a need and there was an opportunity. And so we kept in touch with her over time through emails. I think I took her to lunch a couple of times because she was local, and just sort of, making sure that we kept contact with them when the right situation presented itself. Then things lined up well for us. So there was a second part to that question. I don't know that I addressed that.
Yeah, no, I think you did. I think it was that idea of really just how do you keep in touch with them? How do you nurture them and keep them alive, right? And it sounds to me what you're saying here is that it is the executive's responsibility. If you see a great candidate, don't assume that they're just going to stay in touch with you. You've got to do the outreach as well. Is that about right?
Absolutely, yes.
Nice. All right. Well, this has been amazing. 30 minutes always goes so fast, but we always love to leave it with the executive. They always get what we call the final word.
Wow.
So Daryl, based on all the questions and discussion we've had today, what is a final word that you want to share with everybody on this topic of ensuring that you are hiring the right people and building high performance teams?
Clear understanding of what success looks like. Make sure that the person has has some capabilities in the area that you're looking for. Don't settle for an okay candidate. It will cost you way more money in the long run if you bring someone in that isn't a good fit for all the reasons that we all know.
I love it. All right. And Daryl, if people want to reach out to you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, I've actually, there are a couple of folks on the call who reached out to me in the last couple of days through LinkedIn. So I appreciate that. Thank you all very much. I'm pretty avid about keeping up with my LinkedIn profile. So that's a great place to reach out to me. So I would say that's probably our first line for communication through LinkedIn, and then anything inside of our community here at Work It Daily.
Wonderful. Perfect. All right. Well, Daryl, thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you to all of you that dive in today, asked your questions. They were wonderful. And if you enjoyed this session, please make sure that you like it and you share it. We want more people to be able to get access to Executive Insider. And until next time, remember, if you want to win, you've got to work it daily. Take
Thanks,
care.
JT.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.